as time goes on, they think they're not accomplishing enough or doing enough or living a, as exciting a life as they would like to live. And it's hard then for them to just accept that life is, and whatever is.
Right. And as we acknowledge what life is and where we are in life, we also have the ability at that point to make decisions about where we want to go and how
Yes.
we want to change circumstances. But the beginning point is really accepting where we are. I think one of the things that happens so often in New Thought is that we end up denying the reality of the moment. And we do that because so many people in New Thought are positive thinkers, and the idea is, well, we simply don't give any credence to negativity. And we don't, I've heard so many people, as I'm sure you have in your ministry, in your counseling, say, oh, don't say that. Don't say that. If you're depressed, don't say you're depressed. If you're sad, don't say you're sad. And in fact, there is some truth to not staying in those places and building upon that consciousness. But it is important to acknowledge where we are in life when we do hurt, when we are unhappy, when we do face illness. And there's nothing at all wrong with acknowledging that reality because it is a transient reality of the moment.
That's right. And I've heard you say often in your sermons, when you're sad, you're sad. When you're sick, you're sick. So we can acknowledge to others that we are, and I know people who, along with what you were just saying, will not acknowledge that they're sick, that they have any problem in their bodies. Well, we all have a physical body that's subject to ailments and subject to problems. So that's one way of explaining to others, no, I can't lead the same social life that I did last week because this week I'm not feeling energetic. So it's so really foolish to not acknowledge that, yes, things happen in our lives, whatever it is.
Whatever it is, and also that once we're at that point, we now can move from it. And the other thing that we can do is to affirm the reality that those circumstances and situations, which are transient, really don't touch the inner person.
That's it.
And I think that's the important issue. Our bodies get sick. But our spirit does not. Although our spirits do get sick and we know we recover spiritually. But for the most part, the reality or the truth is that our spiritual being is radiant and healthy and vibrant always. And so one of the things that we know is that if we claim the reality that this radiance is a part of our life, if we claim the reality that peace is a part of our life in the midst of seeming turmoil, if we claim the abundance of life in the midst of our poverty or our lack, then that spiritual truth comes out into our physical life. And then the physical circumstances and situations may very well change, but they may not. And I think that's an important issue to understand. And again, it's a trap that many New Thought people fall into, and many traditionalists fall into too. And the thought is, if I can just say the right prayer, if I can just think the right thing, if God can just like me enough, if I can just be forgiven, if I can just do this, then my body will be healed, the disease will be gone, the poverty will be lifted, and all of those things. And the reality is that all of those experiences are there to teach us lessons, but they are not a part of the true reality of who and what we are.
Exactly. And we draw those aspects to us when we're down in the dumps, when we're down in our thinking. And if we could always remember that we truly are spiritual beings in a physical body, then we live from that higher aspect of our own beinghood. And then we can cope with illness and we can cope with whatever is, because we realize that that is very transient. But the spirituality in our lives, the spiritual aspect of our own beinghood has always been, is a part of God today, has always been, and always will be. And when we think along those lines, we can then accept that the ego might get in the way sometimes, the personality self might get in the way, but then we can see when they are doing that and then change our actions and change our way of living. And then others react to us in a different way when we're living from that higher aspect of being, because they don't see us as being egotistical, or they just laugh at whatever we're doing and laugh with us.
Yeah, very important to create the distinction between the physical us, or the physical world, and the spiritual realm. And even though the two exist in the same space, so to speak, we need to understand that they are separate and distinct. And we need to understand that our spiritual reality, our spiritual essence is good and only good, that it is strong and only strong, that it is peaceful and powerful. It is unified with the presence and the power of God, and nothing can separate us. And the other thing I think that's important for people to understand is that God's will for us doesn't change. And I think we have a big problem with that, because there's the thought that God if something tragic happens or some difficulty, that's God's will. And that God's will for us changes based upon what we do or circumstance or situations or what God feels about us. Well, in fact, God's will is constant, and it is good and only good. And no matter what the circumstance or situation, God's will for you and me and everyone else is that we should have health and prosperity and grace and goodness and all the things that abundance and happiness and peace bring.
Mm-hmm. And perfection in our lives. And we then cloud the issue by worry, fear, any anger, any other negativity. We cloud the issue, and then we cloud the spiritual aspect of our own beinghood and our connection with the inner creator, God. And so as we cloud that issue, then we let our ego come into play, we let our fears and our little self, lower self, come into play, and then the higher self cannot function to the highest aspect of being, because we're allowing it to be clouded by that lower aspect. So, and we've all seen, you and I have seen people who have been gloriously ill, and we've seen people who have been so ill in spirit that they think they can't live another day. And we've seen people whose bodies are on the verge of transition, but their spirit is gloriously there, strongly apparent. And this is what we need to learn to do in everyday life. And when we do learn to do that, then we don't let the little problems of life get us down, because we see how transient they really are.
And absolutely true. When we're able to see that these circumstances and situations are just things that are relegated to this earthly experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important understanding that we need to have, and that is that the little number of days or years that we have here is not the totality of our life. And that runs as a common thread through all spiritual traditions, through all religions. And we certainly believe that in New Thought as well.
And when we live from that higher aspect of our beinghood, when we live from the spiritual being aspect, then we do brighten the corner where we are. We do bloom where we're planted. We do live with peace and harmony in our environment, whatever that environment might be that we find ourselves. Because then we realize, when we're living from the higher aspect, the spiritual aspect, that we're capable of changing whatever we want to change. If we really want to change something, we can. And we don't feel defeated and think, no, I can't do that because it's too much beyond me. We realize we can do anything. With God, all things are possible.
Right. And that the aspect that you shared at the beginning of the program and have just mentioned again is that brighten the corner where you are, I think, is really a tremendous lesson in how we can bloom where we're planted. Because so often when we find ourselves in difficult times, we want to go somewhere else. We want to do something different. We don't want to be out of this suffering, so to speak, or this pain. But in fact, when we're suffering, when we're in pain, when we're unhappy in a circumstance or situation, that's the very time that we need to brighten the corner where we are. If we can't brighten it for ourselves, we can brighten it for those around us.
Exactly.
And that has a magnificent ability to bolster us and to allow us to really bloom and shine where we are.
And we know when we're doing that and when we're not, because we feel defeated when we're not. And when we are doing it, then we are at peace. Regardless of what our circumstances are, we are at peace. And we've seen that manifest in the lives of others and in our own lives, and our listeners can think of their own lives and see where they've done it and see how they did it, and then use that knowledge, use that prior experience to help them lift to the highest aspect possible.
Yeah. I'm thinking now about people who are in a bad relationship, for instance. And of course, from time to time, relationships do go sour.
Exactly.
And some of them very vindictively and in a very pointedly ugly way. But I'm thinking of families where children are involved, and how often when parents are at odds end with each other and are having difficulties with their relationships, they become so often preoccupied with their own vendettas.
Yeah. And
here are these children, when in fact the aspect of brightening the corner where you are is certainly something that if both partners would focus on the children and the quality of life for the children, then it begins to dissipate the other problems, not to deny them and not to put them aside, but at least it creates a different environment in a workplace where someone is having a difficult time with a superior or a boss or a coworker. And so often that bitterness and unhappiness spills over into every aspect of that individual's life, when in fact the conflict is with one or two other people. That brighten the corner where you are gives us those individuals a tremendous opportunity to make life better for more people in the office or work environment, and takes the focus off of that anger and off of that bitterness, and then it softens the edge and it sets the stage for a transition or a change.
Yes. And don't you think the keynote there is not being self-centered? And we don't have to look around and see how everyone else is going to react to us, but we have to know that we're responsible for our environment and responsible for how we react to the people around us.
And the way that we react to the people around us determines how we feel about life, doesn't it?
Yes. And the way we react determines, I think, our spiritual growth, the way we react to other people. And we can be all different ways, but if we are just calm and peaceful, and if someone is upset at us and we say, well, I'm really sorry you're upset. I'm sorry that I've upset you. It doesn't take any energy to say that. And we should be sorry we've upset that person.
We definitely should. And Dr. Freelander and I have been sharing with you ideas about how you can be happy and bloom where you are planted. We hope that you found this information useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.